All right. Well, I'm Taylor Sims. I'm the Public Engagement and Professionalization Graduate Student Coordinator. And this is the second in a series of conversations with alumni. And so, Emil, you're joining us. You also participated in the alumni conference last year in the before times. So thank you so much for being here. Could you just briefly introduce yourself? I kind of laid the groundwork, like when did you get your PhD and what's your current role, or anything else you want to include is fine as well.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you for inviting me to be here. I am obviously I've completed a PhD, defended a PhD in history at University of Michigan in 2008. Today, I work as the title is called Applied Research Scholar, which means that basically I'm a staff historian at the Mandel Center for Advanced Holocaust Studies, which is kind of a research and academic arm of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. I had, after completing my dissertation and getting my degree, I was lucky to, and you know, in the period as our economy was collapsing in 2009, I was very lucky to get a tenure track position straight out of graduate school. I actually got a job offer that was extended even before I had defended my dissertation. So speaking of before times, I feel like that was a different period at the time, even then. And so I went to work at the University of South Carolina in Columbia as an assistant professor of history. And for a number of reasons, I decided to leave that position and and very soon into it, which I might talk about this later but anyway, after just 1 year, I was lucky to be accepted as a scholar at the Holocaust Museum, and I have worked there ever since.
That's great. I would love to hear more about your decision to shift from, you know, that role as a professor into your current role. We can either circle back to it or talk about it now, whichever feels more natural to you.
Okay. So, and I guess I should also explain what I do at the museum, and
yeah, please,
because it's both. Obviously, it's not. I work at the museum, which is a very different institution from a university, which is something that we get trained to think about, you know, and to professionalize ourselves to be successful in that setting. But it's also not as antithetically opposed to the university, the mission of research, as the museum as an institution sounds. So I'm kind of in between and work at the research center, which, and the core of my job is academic research. I do what I was largely trained to do in graduate school. I read, I write articles, and I do research. But I also do kind of projects that I feel like I would not be working on as an academic in a university setting. When I was hired, I was hired because I was trained broadly in East European and Jewish history, and I was coming from Jewish history training, and the main project which the center was working on at that time was a series of source volumes entitled Jewish Responses to Persecution, which was basically like it was a book series featuring primary sources from the Jewish perspective from the Holocaust period, trying to address the imbalance of scholarship that's based on perpetrator sources and offering and kind of mainstreaming the Jewish sources for the study of the Holocaust. So it had this scholarly pretension, and yet in my other projects, I work with very different audiences and trying to kind of also think about broader implications of being an academic and a historian in the world in which tenure track and tenured professorships at universities are not the only or even dominant mode of employment for historians. So we created here at the museum, at the Mandel Center, I worked with a colleague to create a website called Experiencing History, which was a kind of a digital reimagining of the book series on which we had worked for years, and which offers instructors teaching Holocaust-related courses at the university level in North America, resources for their teaching in the classroom. So we offer hundreds of translated, contextualized, and introduced by experts, by me and other experts in-house and outside, primary sources that are easily plugged into people's syllabi and teaching outcomes and methodologies, while still being flexible enough and open enough to be approached by whatever discipline or goal in your education you have as an instructor. So that's what we have developed, and that is a very different animal from your regular research and kind of academic production that I would probably have been doing as a professor at the university. I'm also I have to say that this also brought us to some broader thinking about academic training. We were very lucky to develop this 2-year partnership with the history department at the University of Michigan, which showed leadership and openness to training their graduates, their graduate students and opening up the training to a much broader set of skills and kind of experiences than the traditional graduate training in history, which I think I had, and I can talk about this later. But so that we took advantage of this openness at Michigan and kind of paired up with the existing course at the history department called HistoryLab or labs, where we paired up with 2 professors, Rita and Jeff Veidlinger, who were teaching this course, and in which we, together with the students and with Jeff and Rita, were kind of working on the content for the website that I mentioned, Experiencing History. And what the students, I hope, got from this course was a set of kind of was both think about all the ways in which their work for this course was different from their other typical graduate classes, like a seminar or you know, a reading course or something like that. Because they paired up with us who work in an academic institution. We assigned assignments that are not academic in their scope. These are, you know, website modules that are directed to audiences for which students, graduate students, typically do not write. We have fostered collaborative work and work on topics and periods that are not, in which the students were not typically you know, working deeply. So while most of them did kind of come from European history background, not all of them were from this background, and so they had to do some, you know, front load mastery of the materials, and that's also kind of what I have to do sometimes. Mm-hmm. Work when, you know, I had to write about, you know, Holocaust diaries, which, you know, that's not my expertise. That's not what I was trained for in graduate school, but that's something I had to read up on quickly, and that in order to be able to write this public-facing website module. So in other words, so this is a long way of saying that this was a course which allowed graduate students to think about and develop and experiment with their other skills and kind of think how they can become and kind of hone their skills that are not for typical academic tracks. And I hope they found it interesting and useful. I think the feedback from these classes, there were two cohorts of people who with whom we worked. You know, their work is online and easily you know, searchable, and there's something to show for. And I feel like they're proud to have worked with a non-academic institution and a public-facing institution and got this experience. I also my work right now is, even though it's kind of, you know, grotesque in this pandemic situation, but it seems like we're on there's some hope, and that things will be going back to some kind of normal. But right now I'm thinking with a team of my colleagues here about a long-term research agenda for the Mandel Center. So that's another way of kind of using my academic training to work on things that are academic, because it will be a research agenda. We will be dedicating serious resources to research on a broad topic, but it's also something that needs to be negotiated with a number of different, as we call them, stakeholders, you know, the museum at large, and then the international community of scholars and people who use and rely on our expertise. So that's another thing of, you know, thinking more broadly about academia. And just briefly to go back to your question about why I decided to leave my position at the university. It's a very simple story and kind of you know, painfully simple. I just didn't like it, and that's, I think I was gonna talk about that for the last question that you sent me, which is, if there are anything else that I can say to students in the program. And I think that's one thing that I had not thought about and considered. And I don't want to belittle, so we are trained, maybe today it's a little different, and especially at Michigan, and people do try to kind of think beyond the university and think about how they can use their degree for other career tracks as well. But when I was in the program, it was not very present, not at all, I would say. We would just not think about these other possibilities. And so I had never had a real conversation with myself about whether this is I want. So the kind of crisis and the big conversation in your and anxiety for people who are close to finishing and kind of are starting to go on the market is not, oh my God, what happens if I get a job that I don't like? It's more, what if I don't get a job? And that's for a very, obvious and kind of legitimate reason. There is a dysfunctional market, structure, unsound and fundamentally unfair. And so, of course, a lot of thinking is directed in that direction. But I have never had an honest conversation with myself. What if you end up living in a place that you don't like? And that's exactly what happened. The colleagues were great, the department was great, the job was great, the best that I could hope for, with a teaching load that was the best I could get, with funding for research which was the best I could hope for. So I was really very lucky, but it's just that I had never thought about, what if this is not what you want? And that's just very simple and kind of also a sign of privilege. I'm aware of that as well, that, I could afford to think about other jobs and other positions, and thankfully something I was successful in securing later, but it was just that simple. I didn't like living in Columbia, South Carolina.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think sometimes even in our current situation, situations, we kind of internalize the idea of just be grateful for whatever you get and just go wherever the job is. But I do think we need to have honest conversations and weighted lists about what matters, instead of just settling for scraps, and actually ask yourself what you want out of a job. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Exactly. And that's something, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think it has to do with the question that you sent me about, what motivated me to enter the history program. And that's possibly also why I had not asked myself these questions, because I really did just want to be a professor. I mean, that's a kind of a funny thing to say, but I just, I wanted to be a professor, to teach history at the university level. And I knew that the best history PhD programs were in the United States. And I've decided to go to the United States and get a degree. And that's what I did. And so from the very beginning, thus, I had kind of geared myself toward that purpose, and then it was only after I got what I thought I had wanted, and what everyone had considered a huge success, that I realized that maybe this is not what I wanted in the first place, and maybe there are other things that would be better for you.
Yeah. So the second half of that question was whether your motivations changed over the course of the program, but it kind of sounds like for you, they changed after, you know, in that second phase when you landed like the dream job and you're like, maybe this isn't my dream job.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah, I think it was at the very end. So, you know, basically after after graduate school, after I was on the way out, I remember, you know, going for the campus interview before I had finished my dissertation. So technically still in the program, and, you know, thinking, you know, on my way back from that campus visit, which was 2 days, 2 full days, and like 2 nights, that I knew. So there were 2 things. One, I had really killed it. I've done so well. They
Good.
do great. And then 2, I hope they don't offer me the job, because then I would have to take it. And that's when I realized that, you know, I really cannot live there, and I really don't like this. So I'm sorry it's so banal, but it is important to kind of to know yourself. And I wish I had asked myself these questions before. And I think a large part of why I didn't was the kind of self-evidence at the time. And I'm happy to say that things are different now from what I see at the history department. But at that time, it was not ever something that you would show, that you are having thoughts about, you know, what comes next, and that you might not be completely on board with academia, and whatever insecurities and anxieties and kind of questions you had. It was very difficult to find a place to put them out in the open, especially with my advisors. And it's not, and I don't want to say that they were, you know, inhuman and kind of, you know, not open to, you know, they were lovely people, but there was this kind of atmosphere that was in the air at the department, that you know, we're here to become top historians that are going to rock at the, you know, job market, and we're all going to get great jobs at the end. And so, because we are Michigan, we are the best. And so there was some of that, and that's, I think, partly why I had not openly talked to people, and even, I would say, myself, honestly, about these issues. And something that I wish had been different is that, and that I wish there was more openness at that time, or there had been more openness to, you know, just the complex ways and paths that historians can take, that the one that we are preparing for, or allocating most of our energy and work toward, is, yes, rewarding and probably something that we would want the most, but by no means is it the only path. And while we are in this training, maybe we can think together even about other paths and see what necessary skills and kind of tweaks in our training we can implement and kind of think of that would make us more competitive for those other trajectories. And there was very little of that. And so that's, I'm happy to see that this, at least from my perspective, it looks like the university, the history department at Michigan is much more open to this kind of conversation. And the alumni conference that I attended last year, I think, testifies to that openness and to the visibility of this question in the first place, which was kind of, even if you kind of thought about it at some level, that was not something you would put out in the open.
Yeah, certainly. And I appreciate your honesty kind of about what the program was like when you were here. And it's definitely a slow culture shift, but one that I think is happening bit by bit, especially as graduate students are, you know, constantly thinking about what's next and facing such like intense precarity. And it's not just out of necessity. It's also, like you were saying, after self-reflection, thinking, oh, even if I was offered that job, would I want it? You know, and I think it's really cool that we're able to ask ourselves that right now, which is probably, you know, one of the main reasons why they're so happy to see people like you who are a successful historian, like a successful placement, you know, at not in a university job.
Yeah, and I also have to say that it's something of a you know, it's even ironic and kind of incredible that I had not thought about these things more seriously when I was there, because, you know, I entered the program at the age of 27, which I was by far the oldest person in the cohort. And that's because I had, you know, my life in Europe after, you know, my college and after my master's degree. I had worked for the UN Refugee Agency in the former Yugoslavia. I had worked for a grant giving. I had basically been running an NGO grant program in an international organization in Budapest. So I had these experiences, and after all these experiences, I've decided, okay, I really am not very happy with what I do. I think I want to be a professor and go like full academic and do research. And so what I think I thought of as a kind of you know, drawback in my background, which is to say, you know, I'm the oldest one here. These are like kids straight from college, people coming in the graduate program, you know, 22 years old. And I thought, I'm too old, I'm never gonna be able to find a job. There'll always be somebody younger and kind of better than me. That could have been, you know, my greatest advantage, because if I were to think of all the ways in which I had already had skills in you know, in real life communication skills, writing skills, all the things that I have done in English for international organizations, I might have been better prepared for that shock that came at the end, and I might have been more prepared for that kind of conversation with myself. So I would say, and I don't know how it is today, and the backgrounds of students and the economy is very different these days, and just the generation of people today that are entering is very different from my generation. And aware of all these things. But I would say, hopefully, there are ways to think about your entering and kind of working in a PhD program, not as something that's radically different from what you have been doing so far, but something that you can combine and think in ways that allow you to build on your previous skills. Of course, you're still going to do a professionally to become a professional historian, and that's not what you were 5 years ago. But don't think of your previous skills and your other things that you have done in your life as antithetical to what you're doing now. I think that's an important thing that I wish somebody had told me when I was in graduate school.
I think that is excellent guidance, and a way to think of yourself as like a full, well-rounded person. And I think at a conversation we've been having repeatedly among the grad students, like we bring in AHA or just amongst ourselves, is like, we often think of all these things as purely professional, but they're also deeply personal. And those two things have to overlap in some meaningful ways to figure out like what you want to do and can do with your life.
Yeah.
If it's not too personal, might I ask, are you happy in your current role?
Yes, I'm very happy. It's no job is perfect.
Of course.
And there are trade-offs, and of course there are things I'm not happy with. But the level of my happiness and kind of being at peace with myself and the world and the things that I do for a living is so much higher than what I'm experiencing at that other job. So I think unequivocally, yes.
Great.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. And again, I know it's like a big, vague question, but you were saying, I just realized I wasn't happy. I'm like, I wonder if you're happy now. And it sounds like you are. I'm also really glad you brought up the HistoryLab course, because I heard excellent things about that from my fellow graduate students. And you mentioned like a pride in, the end result that's now available. And I can only imagine those resources are even more important now in this increasingly virtual learning environment. We have 2 more history labs that are partnerships with the AHA and the DIA coming up that have similar goals with kind of different methodologies. So hopefully, those have a similar kind of success story.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I mean, I think it's a great initiative and a great, and the students were amazing in both groups, and it also gave me this personal kind of, I was so happy to be in a position to work with young people at Michigan and kind of like the place I have a connection to and the university and the department that have done so much for me. And so that was a great initiative, and I'm hoping that there will be other ways to keep that collaboration in the future as well. Right now, for a number of bureaucratic reasons, we are not allowed as a federal institution to develop exclusive partnerships with the single institution. So we were advised that it would be better to, if we're to continue this model, to pair up with other institutions in the United States, and we're exploring now these options. But I'm hoping that there might be other opportunities in the future that are not based on experiencing history, but are also part of our research and kind of projects that might depend on or be addressed to broader audiences, that we can draw on this partnership for the future collaboration. I have a few things in mind already, and
oh, good.
They might be coming.
That's great. I'll keep an eye out for those.
Yeah.
You've touched on several of the questions already, so I really appreciate that. But one, again, you've touched on it a little bit, but specifically, you mentioned like what you wish you had thought about in graduate school, but in terms of professionalization and career development is something we're trying to invest in with graduate students a lot, and thinking about the diverse skills you don't even realize you're cultivating, throughout the trajectory of the program. Are there things, thinking back to your time in the program in terms of professionalization that you maybe wish you had leaned into a little more or wish existed for you while you were here?
So I have to say yes and no. So the yes in the sense of my vantage point today and the kind of things that I've already mentioned, trying to be open to a variety of skills and trajectories. That was not the case. And so I don't know how we could have done that, 10, 15 years ago. It just, it wasn't on my own radar. I'm sure there were people who were more honest and kind of forward thinking than myself and who maybe thought about this, but it was not something that I could even imagine, to be honest. But I think that would have benefited, just like an openness about, having different jobs and
For sure.
not, for example, what if you didn't want to be like, what if you wanted to work at the museum? That was like, if I had told my advisor at that time that I'm not going to apply for university positions, I'm not interested in it, that I could not have told him that. So that's just didn't exist. So maybe, even that kind of openness didn't exist. But then in terms of professionalization, I think given at that time, I think we were still, the department was still on the kind of cutting edge of things. Like I remember we had in my last year in the program, we had these workshops with faculty for students who were on the job market. And it was an entire year. There were 2 semesters of, how to, in the fall semester, how to write letters and how to apply for jobs. And then in the spring semester, how to, we had mock interviews and workshopping and things like that. And as simple and kind of commonsensical as it sounds, this was revolutionary. This was not what my peers in other departments had. Like people were from top universities were really surprised that we would have people helping us with our job letters and kind of workshopping and moreover that we would want to be in a group with so I had a friend in the cohort who was going to apply for the same jobs at the same time, and yet we were together in this and working and helping each other on the letters and so on. So that was something that even then I thought was quite great and not something you could take for granted. And I see these openness today as something that's kind of building on that, kind of being on the helm of all this, being always pushing it. I'm very happy to see that the department is interested in these other paths of being a historian.
Definitely. And I think the professionalization, career development, career diversity conversations are very connected to what now is the job skills colloquium that people at the end of the program can take the exact things you're talking about, and those endeavors are very connected. So it's interesting to hear how it kind of started when you were here. So with your position now, it might seem really obvious, but since this is the question I ask in, these alumni connections conversations, how do you see the role of public engagement? And of course, working, in the institution of a museum, it's different than working within the institution of a university. But how do you kind of see and pursue public engagement in your current role?
So this is something that, given what I've said so far, this is something, obviously I work at the museum, so it's central to my work, right? In some capacity, even when I'm, doing deep research on an arcane subject that very few people are interested in, like, I don't know, hunger in the Warsaw Ghetto, like very, very, very specific. Even then, I have to think about is this going to be used for an exhibit? Is this going to be used for some other product that the museum is offering? So public facing work and public engagement is something that is central for my work, and something that I had not really thought very much about in my graduate training. So that's one of the drawbacks of my story. But there are also different levels of public engagement. So, for example, Experiencing History, which I mentioned, is a public-facing project. It's geared toward the very specific audience, which is college-level students in North America, and so that took it's a very kind of well-defined niche in which one of the things that I work on fits. But then I've been working, for example, right now I'm writing a research brief for our permanent exhibit revitalization project. So we're thinking about changing our permanent exhibit, which has been like it is today since the opening of 1994. So that's a major rehauling. And I'm supposed to write a paper on Jewish life in Hitler's Europe. And, for somebody who's trained in academically trained as a historian, this sounds like, this huge, horrifying, endless task. But now I'm approaching this from a very different perspective, and I'm thinking of this task as something that is geared toward an exhibit. So this, whatever I write, and the topics and themes and kind of main developments and the points that we need to get across are all designed with the most general audience you can think of in mind. It's for people who literally walk from the street and come into the to the museum. So it's a very different animal, and it's very kind of it gives me joy, I should say, because I do think, at the end of the day, I think when people are able to learn something from your work, and even if that point is not as well argued and as sophisticated as your brilliant chapter in your book, but it's a more general point that kind of makes a connection with broader issues today, such as, for example, racism or racist politics or nationalism, things like basic things like that you can help people understand through your work. I think that's very rewarding, and I'm very happy to be contributing to these things.
So in our last few minutes, because I don't want to keep you any longer than promised, kind of my last question was about this COVID-19 world and how you've adapted, and just more broadly, how you're doing.
So that's yeah, thank you for asking. I have to say I'm not doing as well as I would like. I think this COVID pandemic is something that's obviously appended all our lives, and there is this notion that we're in this together, but we're not really in this together. And I've trying to maintain my perspective and know that I'm one of the fortunate ones who can afford to work from home and whose job allows me to work from home. I, have access to everything, or maybe not everything, but most of the things I need to do my job well and to perform well. So I, on that very basic level, it has really not impacted me a lot. But as somebody who cares about society and people and community, it's been very hard for me. And I think, I mean, there's all these ways and kind of conversations about how to cope, and I'm trying to do all of them, and physical exercise and walks and all, whatever they tell you to do, I try to do. But I'm also I'm very worried about the kind of permanent and long-term transformation this is bringing to not only our everyday lives that will be different, but also I feel we don't know yet what the cost and the kind of impact this whole new way of doing things will have on academic infrastructure in this country and more generally. So we still don't know how universities will cope with this, how what the implications will be for people who are graduate students now, for incoming graduate students in the future. I'm very worried about all these things, and so it's not while my own situation is I'm doing well, all things considered, but I'm not sure we can even ponder the full implications of this for our lives as historians in the future, and that's something that I worry about.
And it's hard not to think about your own present as a historian of like, well, we don't know what the long-term impacts will be. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Great. Well, is there anything else you wanted to add, or a question that I maybe skipped? If not, that's also fine.
No, I think that's all. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm happy if this will be even a little helpful to anyone at your department, and I hope you're doing well, and yeah, let me know in the future if I can help in any way.
I certainly will, and it will be helpful. It's already been so nice for me to hear, all of these things. So I really appreciate it too. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.